There's always those few players every year that get, for multiple reasons, the label of being a locker room cancer. Now, just because they may not be the easiest teammates to get along with now, doesn't mean they can't change. But unfortunately for the handful of players that are featured, in each situation there's a pattern, or rather a picture, that's been painted that we'll be doing our best to uncover. In this video, we'll be going over a select number of players who have been recently given the label of being a locker room cancer. And with that, here are 5 players who have been labeled locker room cancer in 2022. NHL journeymen have a multitude of different reasons for always being on the move. Maybe their play has naturally slumped, a plethora of injuries might be plaguing them, or they could just be difficult to get along with. For Travis Hamonic, his reason for bouncing from team to team seems to be related to the latter. Now, we don't really know with 100% certainty that it was the issue in every single instance, but what we do know is that in Vancouver, it definitely was. According to NHL insider Frank Scheifele, Hamonic wasn't missed one bit after he was traded to Ottawa last deadline. It's not a substantial change, but moving out Hamonic and bringing in Dermott, the change in the room, multiple players have reached out to say just what a breath of fresh air it was after getting rid of Travis Hamonic. Scheifele remarked while on air on Sportsnet 650. With 1 year remaining on his current contract that has an AAV of $3 million, it'll be interesting to see if the defenseman will remain in Ottawa for much longer. For Ryan Suter, who's also been on multiple teams at this point, it's been pretty hard to ignore the statements that have come from his former teammates here recently. To start, his former captain, that was in the lineup during Suter's days in Nashville, Jason Arnott, shared his recollections regarding Suter's behavior from earlier in his career. On the well-known Cam and Strick podcast, Arnott began to paint a very troubling picture, portraying Suter as not the best teammate. When asked about Ryan Suter and Shea Weber specifically, the former captain didn't hold back. The attitude of Suter was night and day to Weber, Arnott says. Arnott then went on to explain that he had lived relatively close to the defenseman and would carpool along with him, back and forth to the rink. And it was during that time that Suter would continuously complain. All he would do was complain, Arnott says. How come he wasn't on the power play? That he doesn't play enough. I can't believe this guy is making this much money. And then there were also the recollections from Suter's teammate from Minnesota, Torrey Mitchell. Mitchell, who joined the Score North podcast, corroborated seeing the same type of entitlement as Arnott claimed he did in Nashville. Mitchell explained that Parise and Suter both had bought houses in Edina, which is a suburb outside of Minneapolis, and continuously lobbied for the team to have their practices at Edina's high school rink instead of Xcel Energy Center, which he explained is also the Wild's practice facility. The duo was granted their request, and they were practicing, according to Mitchell, 3 times a week at the high school. That was 5 minutes from Suter's house. That's the power they had early on, Mitchell says. And longtime Wild reporter Judd Zolgad revealed that he also knew of the hold the pair had on the team, while saying the problems that Torrey just documented, they are the tip of the iceberg of why these two became so despised. And after, as Suter was concerned, the reporter said in a source I'll link below that an unnamed coach during an altercation with the defenseman deemed him as uncoachable. I'll leave the full podcast episode below if you'd like to learn more, but in more ways than one, Parise and Suter both had more control than they should have of the team. Going back to Arnott, he validated this fact by saying, quote, I also heard he was a huge distraction in the Wild dressing room too. All he did was complain, he says. Here's a couple of issues that have cultivated during Mark Scheifele's lengthy tenure with the Jets. First, we have the whole Patrik Laine drama, which is kind of old news, but still relevant to the situation. No one really understood why Patrik Laine so desperately wanted out of Winnipeg until he finally was shipped to Columbus. And later, when Laine revealed the truth, it definitely put Scheifele in a bad light. According to multiple sources over in Finland, Laine revealed how he was treated by a couple of his teammates. Laine said that Scheifele and Wheeler both teamed up against him in an attempt to make him feel inferior. Head coach at the time, Paul Maurice, also, according to the sources, was too afraid to stop the ongoing harassment. Wheeler, who came out and somewhat apologized following the trade, admitted that he could have communicated better with his teammates. However, when Scheifele was questioned regarding the situation, he didn't have a word to say. So we witnessed that unfold. Then there was a strange Paul Maurice resignation. Shortly after Maurice departed, it was almost an omen for the mediocrity to come. After the team failed to make the Stanley Cup playoffs, spectators began looking for answers. One popular theory seemed to be that Scheifele had messed up the locker room chemistry somehow with his behavior. Obviously, it's hard to know if that was 100% the case, but what we do know is that the team was definitely out of sync during the last bout of post-game interviews last season. When asked about the prospect of remaining in Winnipeg, Scheifele seemed to reply with rather egocentric comments while saying, "I have to think about my career and what's best for me. Those are going to be talks with my agents and everyone in my family to figure out what I really want," he says. And it was directly after that Paul Stastny interjected, interrupting Blake Wheeler, and went on to take the opposite approach by saying, "We've got to be held accountable, whether it's player on player. We've got to have more respect for each other. When you don't have that, when you don't care about the teammate next to you, potentially, and you just care about what you're doing or certain individual things, that starts bleeding into your game. Also, you have to have self-awareness and realize sometimes you have to sacrifice a little for the greater of the team." At 27 years of age, Domi is now suiting up for his 4th team in 7 seasons played. As puzzling as that may sound for a player who's notched 40 or more points on 4 occasions, for Domi, the issues may well lie on the off-ice side. For one, we do know that Domi had a strained relationship with Habs' former coach, Claude Julien. After deciding to bench Domi for taking what he deemed an unnecessary penalty, Julien remarked, "It's not the first time he's taken a bad penalty. There's consequences," Julien says. The uncertainty for Domi only increased in the bubble as the forward had been demoted to the 4th-line center position by the time the play-in round commenced. When asked about his relationship with Julien, Domi refused to address the situation by saying, "I'd rather not get into it." After Domi was traded to Columbus, he also made a puzzling comment to team reporter by almost instantly remarking on the locker room chemistry by saying, "Never been a part of a locker room like this." Well, it became clear that Domi's issues followed him to Ohio's capital, at least as far as his former head coach John Tortorella was concerned. Recently, in an article from Frank Cervelli on the Daily Faceoff, Torts indicated on ESPN in so many words that Domi was indeed a locker room cancer. This was how Cervelli took it, but knowing that a player who scored 73 points 3 seasons ago cost the Canes only a slim $1.32 million, well, there has to be a reason for such a bargain. His offensive production has dropped off, yes, but while putting the pieces together, it seems like, in my opinion at least, there's a little more to it. It seemed like 2022 was the ultimate reveal regarding the Jack Eichel story. It was almost like this invisible covering had been removed, and all of a sudden, everyone was able to see the true Jack Eichel once and for all. Sure, everyone is going to have their own opinions, and they're not always going to match up, but it definitely seemed like after Eichel was traded to Vegas, hockey fans began to feel differently towards him. For starters, this is a guy that legitimately began his NHL career out by saying he was better than Connor McDavid. Yes, that's definitely what happened. Eichel gets to Buffalo and pretty much wants to take the reins and to call the shots when it came to managerial duties. There was a whole Dan Bilesma firing, Eichel wanted the captaincy, and the behavior continued for years on end. By the time Eichel began having issues with his neck and needing surgery, he had already submitted a trade request months prior, but yet still wanted a special surgery that hadn't been performed on any NHL player prior to. Since this is a summary, and the Jack Eichel saga is a quite long and detailed one, I'd highly recommend checking out my video where I dive into Eichel's situation specifically and detail the sources in which I gleaned my information from. Even still, I will link my sources below if you'd like to learn more as well.